I once watched a small clip of Jordan Peterson talking about white kids' obsession with gangsta rap culture, particularly white suburban boys. Jordan Peterson stated the reason that white kids were obsessed with hip-hop was because of its aggression. He stated that in the mainstream of the West, the ideal male is one who is harmless, when in reality, this is not true to male nature, nor is it something desirable to women. He stated that the aggression of hip-hop is a corrective element in the mainstream of the West, as it is the last bastion of true male prowess, which is something that, if done correctly, can be a high achievement for males and society as a whole, since the male helps direct that society. Now, of course, not all of hip-hop is aggressive, and what Jordan Peterson is talking about, specifically, is gangsta rap culture. There are many other forms that aren't aggressive or violent at all, but for this video, we're not focusing on them, but rather gangsta rap culture, which is what Jordan Peterson is unknowingly talking about. We'll also look at gangsta culture as a whole as well. If little white kids are obsessed with gangsta rap despite being worlds away from it, then it showcases a connection between races and cultures. It got me thinking further about one of my favorite TV shows, Vikings, and one of my favorite cultures and peoples of history. A pumped up political drama surrounding early medieval Europe, specifically in the regions of Norway, Scandinavia, and the Saxon kingdoms of ancient Britain. The series is filled with what you would come to expect from a political drama: backstabbing, plots, interesting players of the power game, sex, and lots of wars, which means lots and lots of battles. Vikings mainly take the approach to this part of human history from the perspective of the Vikings, as we follow legendary Viking farmer turned king Ragnar Lothbrok, along his brother Rollo, his wife Lagafa, and later on his sons Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and many more. The show is filled with many interesting characters, plot lines, arcs, and bits of history mixed matched. The more I watched the show and the more I looked at Norse mythology and culture as a whole, with its hero worship, wars, and overall manliness, the more I saw correlations with modern gangsta rap. In this video, I'm going to look at the two very distant worlds. I will look at their characteristics and show you that Viking culture and gangsta rap culture and gangsta culture are more similar than you thought. For the video, I will look at 5 categories and characteristics both cultures share: the obsession with fame and glory, the high masculinity, the fact that both cultures are predominantly warrior cultures, the obsession with wealth and material possession, and the fact that both come from an environment of small means, and that environment created a spirit to want to conquer and fight for a better living, albeit in a negative way. Also, to be noted, there will be many spoilers ahead. If you like analytical videos and the deeper meaning of hip-hop culture and art and its connection and relation to other mediums, then subscribe and stay tuned for more videos like this. To start off, let's look at the obsession with fame and glory. In Vikings, there is an abundant desire amongst many characters to seek glory, and this is true in their overall culture and mythos as well. Rollo and many others tag along with Ragnar to go discover if there are lands beyond theirs, even though in real life during this time they knew lands existed beyond theirs, because they desire fame. Rollo later on seized with pain and resentment because he lives underneath the shadow of his older brother Ragnar, and decides to betray Ragnar multiple times when he sees a chance of rising out of his brother's shadow. Ivar, Ragnar's son, states that he wants to be the most famous man alive, and seeks to avenge his father's death by waging wars on the Saxons and seeking to conquer as much territory as he can, as well as eventually taking over Kattegat and proclaiming himself a god. When one looks at Viking lore, the gods are always fighting, warring, and trying to best each other for the sake of glory. It is a constant struggle of divine one-up, and this never ends, and is the cause of many of the great stories that fill the Norse mythology. Gangsta rap culture is no different in this regard. Men in this culture are highly obsessed with fame and glory. Rappers talk about their large drug exploits, which most of the time are highly exaggerated or in a distant past where it can't hurt them. Because let's be frank, if Rick Ross was telling the truth, he would have gone to prison a long time ago. Like his real life counterpart, Freeway Ricky Ross. There's constant talk of how they overcome the ops, which is slang for the enemy or a rival gang, and how they will kill them, rob them, and take their bitches. Much like what the Vikings would do. There are a lot of rappers who do these things, such as the numerous Chirac rappers and the infamous top 6 gang members of Miami, Florida. But all of this is done for greater glory, for clout, for rep or reputation, or to bring glory to one's name. Both parties go to war and partake in criminal acts to bring a form of glory to their name, whether it be robbing, thieving, killing, the raping of women, and such other things. They will do it to gain it. Be sure, if Vikings existed today, they'd be locked up. And if the gangsters or gangsta rap culture, at least the real ones, were allowed. When one looks at Viking lore, the gods are always fighting, warring, and trying to best each other for the sake of glory. It is a constant struggle of divine one-up, and this never ends, and is the cause of many of the great stories that fill the Norse mythology. Gangsta rap culture is no different in this regard. Men in this culture are highly obsessed with fame and glory. Rappers talk about their large drug exploits, which most of the time are highly exaggerated, or in a distant past where it can't hurt them. Because let's be frank, if Rick Ross was telling the truth, he would have gone to prison a long time ago. Like his real life counterpart, Freeway Ricky Ross. There's constant talk of how they overcome the ops, which is slang for the enemy or a rival gang, and how they will kill them, rob them, and take their bitches. Much like what the Vikings would do. There are a lot of rappers who do these things, such as the numerous Chirac rappers and the infamous top 6 gang members of Miami, Florida. But all of this is done for greater glory, for clout, for rep or reputation, or to bring glory to one's name. Both parties go to war and partake in criminal acts to bring a form of glory to their name, whether it be robbing, thieving, killing, the raping of women, and such other things. They will do it to gain it. Be sure, if Vikings existed today, they'd be locked up. And if the gangsters or gangsta rap culture, at least the real ones, were allowed free reign like the Vikings, they'd take it and go as far as the Vikings did. This leads me to the next characteristic that both cultures share in abundance, and that's the heightened masculinity. There's a lot of talk of toxic masculinity in the mainstream of politics these days, and a lot of times it's used as a talking point, a way of attacking a certain side. To be sure, it exists, but it's also overused to describe regular masculinity. Now, I'm in no ways arguing that Viking culture and gangster rap culture is all the time regular masculinity, and that a man should aim to be like these guys in all of their ways. Of course not. A man should be strong, he should be able to lead, and he should be a warrior, ready to defend himself and, even more importantly, those around him, especially those who are close to him, like family members and so forth. But those same traits can run amok if not controlled. The toughness and strength of a warrior that defends can be used to attack and oppress. The abilities given to protect can be used to cause destruction and bring mass chaos to those around that person. And as we look at the Viking culture and the gangster rap culture, we see this in spades. Both cultures are highly masculine and use many things to test this masculinity. Being a great warrior, sleeping with lots of women, and the aggressive acquisition of wealth at any cost. Both cultures and peoples take the masculine traits and turn them up to 10 and then multiply them by 10. Of course, if you were to ask them this, they'd see nothing wrong with it. Even though it brings death and destruction to both sides, the conquerors and their victims. In the show, we see the Vikings rape and pillage their way through medieval Britain, slaughtering countless men, women, and children, destroying towns, cities, and looting tons of goods. And a lot of them lose their life in the process as well, or it later comes back to stab them in the back. Gangster rappers tend to commit robbery, drive-by shootings in general, assaulting others, at times rape, selling drugs to those around them, which brings misery, death, and destruction to so many, and themselves. It's always been said to me as I grew up, if you pick the street life, it'll only end in 2 ways for you. You'll either go to jail, or you will die. Both cultures share the same heightened masculinity that, at many times, goes in a realm of being dangerous and destructive. The next point I want to look at is the importance of being a warrior in these traditions. Both these traditions put a heavy emphasis on being a fighter. For you to take your glory and establish your rep, you have to fight and win to do this. And the only way to do that is to be a warrior, and a good one at that too. In Viking culture, we see many of their legendary men being great warriors, all being able to fight. From Ragnar to Ubba to Rollo to the gods themselves such as Loki and Thor and Odin. All of these legends are veterans of many battles, are conquerors in their own right, and have a great deal of fighting skill. Similarly, this emphasis is also a big thing in gangsta culture. In the gangsta culture, it is a constant struggle for territory, for respect, and establishing one's name, and one of the ways of gaining those things is through fighting. Now, it's not as prevalent as it is in the Viking age, but it is still there. What I mean by this is that there are plenty of skinny thugs who rely on guns solely. Even though guns can be considered and are considered a part of the modern warrior's arsenal, and in no way wrong, there are lots of men, or rather young boys and men, who aren't fully men, who rely solely on guns, and not on their fists and physical prowess. When one looks at the early 90s and the times before that, there was less use of guns, and you could see most gang members fighting with their fists and using their physical prowess, and rarely using guns. Again, gang members still squabble today as well. It is just the use of firearms is unfortunately more prevalent than ever before. The point still holds though. Gang members still need to be able to fight, to be able to hold their own if they want to retain their respect and their territory. The next point of similarity to look at is their obsession with wealth and materialistic gain. Both cultures have this as part of their goals, and many of their fighting and conquering is based on a desire to gain wealth, the goal of attaining land and a mass amount of treasures and materialistic goods. Ragnar Lothbrok sacks the kingdom of Northumbria and extorts King Aela for vast amounts of gold. He later on sacks and conquers the city of Paris to gain riches. He tries to attack Wessex, and his successors do the same thing, to acquire land and even more wealth. In Viking culture, many of the kings, earls, or high lords tend to be buried with their possession, and they bury much of their possessions for the afterlife. Similarly, in gangsta culture, you see this desire for wealth as well. Some will sell drugs, try to conquer new territories, and blocks to expand their empire. Make different deals with other groups, usually excluding rival gangs, to gain more product, which could be various sorts of drugs, firearms, and even women, to be able to sell so that they can amass more money. In gangsta rap, you hear them bragging about the amount of weight they moved, and the fact that many of them move into making music, or try to, isn't just for the love of it, it is another means of making money and accruing more wealth and power. Both these cultures have a strong appetite for gaining more. It is embedded into their ethos and is one of their many reasons for living and doing the things they do. They will cause destruction and mayhem and cross seas and travel to gain these things at any cost. There are many notable examples of this, such as Big Meech and his whole gang that ran in the early 2000s in the South. There, they ran amok, governed the rap game in the South, and committed horrific crimes, from robbing, drug dealing, and killing, and much more. Another example could be the Supreme Team, which was a notorious gang in New York that is also associated with 50 Cent. During the early 2000s, 50 Cent and his crew's G-Unit went at war against Supreme and many of their own crew members. This war would go on for years and would end up with the deaths of many people, until it finally ended in the mid-2000s, with Supreme being locked up, many notable members being dead, and so on. Both these cultures have a strong appetite for gaining more. It is embedded into their ethos and is one of their main reasons for living and doing the things they do. They would cause destruction and mayhem and cross seas and travel to gain these things at any cost. The reason they have such a fervent desire for materialistic gain leads me to my next and final point, which is their environment. Both of these cultures come from and exist in a turbulent, violent, and desolate environment where there is little hope. This is the environment that fuels much of the ethos of their cultures and beliefs and behavior. It is known in history that hard places breed hard men, and dire situations pushes humans to achieve some form of excellence and innovation in an effort to survive and eventually thrive. The Vikings all came from Scandinavia. Though there was spring, the winters would be incredibly harsh, and the terrain was mainly devoid of resources. With this lack of resources and ability to thrive, the Vikings took to sailing to other lands to trade and many times raid. They became great shipbuilders and sailed far and wide, even entering the Americas hundreds of years before Columbus or the not yet confirmed Abubarakita II. Much of their ethos comes from this desire to gain a better living because their environment didn't grant them this. In this way, gangster culture also evolves for the same reason. Many of the gang members tend to come from low-income, poor communities where there is little prospect. Communities that have a long tradition of being desolate. Some may say that it is the people who make the environment what it is in this case, and in some ways this is true. But we must also remember that many of these communities weren't allowed to grow into prosperous places. Or they were prosperous, but it ended up being sabotaged due to unfair laws in an unfair time of the United States where a majority of the population was racially oppressed, which has spiraled it, or at least helped spiral it, towards the destructive state it is in now. In this environment, robbing, killing, and the like are a common thing and seen as a proper way of coming up and making your wealth. Like the Vikings, they not only commit violence towards themselves, but others as well. The obsession with wealth, which can be seen in the braggadocio songs in the gangster subgenre of rap, always talk about all the money and cars and expensive clothes they have. Like the Vikings, this too stems from them coming from an environment where there is very little offered. And so they spread their wings out in a violent nature to take what they were denied. All of these things put together, the obsession with glory and fame, the heightened masculinity, the warrior culture, the obsession with wealth, and all this being born from a desire for more because they were born in an environment that gave very little, shows how the Vikings of early medieval Scandinavia and the black gangsters of modern America have a lot in common. True, the gangsters do a lot of things in smaller scale in some ways, as some may say that the gang members fight for small blocks while the Vikings fought for large territories and countries. To that I'd say not every battle the Vikings fought were of grand size, and similarly, gang members of today do fight for large swaths of territory where they can peddle their drugs and other activities, but it is more underground and harder to measure in the way we do with the Vikings. And as I've said earlier, if the gangsters of today were allowed the free reign the Vikings were allowed, they'd accomplish the same things. And if the Vikings existed today in the same system as the gangsters, then they too would be limited in the same way. Nonetheless, the underlying characteristics are there. The ethos and beliefs are there, and they are all more or less the same. This being the case, it shows how the two cultures and peoples, though being worlds apart, hundreds of years apart, and racially different, still share similar human traits and drives and motivations and fates. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more videos and analyses just like this. If you see what I'm seeing, or not, let me know in the comment section, and why. Thanks, and peace.